The sun beat down mercilessly on the rolling plains of Wyoming Territory as Penelope Jane wiped sweat from her brow, the defiance in her heart burning hotter than the July heat of 1878. At 22, she had endured her father's tyranny long enough, and today's declaration of independence would either grant her freedom or seal her fate. You will marry Nathaniel Spencer, and that's final. Harold Jane slammed his fist against the weathered kitchen table, making the tin plates jump. The man owns half the cattle in the county and has offered a handsome price for your hand. Penelope stood tall, her honey-brown hair falling loose from its pins as she shook her head. I am not livestock to be sold, father. I will not marry a man 3 times my age who has buried 2 wives already. Her father's face darkened to a dangerous shade of crimson. You ungrateful girl. After all I've done since your mother died, you've done nothing but drink away her memory and our farm. The words escaped before she could stop them, and the stinging slap that followed was not unexpected. What was unexpected was Penelope's response. For the first time in her life, she raised her hand back at her father. She didn't strike him, but the threat alone was enough. Harold Jane staggered back, his eyes wide with shock before narrowing with rage. You've crossed the line, girl. He grabbed her by the arm, his fingers digging into her flesh as he dragged her across the yard toward the barn. Penelope fought, but years of hard drinking hadn't diminished her father's strength. The neighboring ranch hands, who'd come to deliver a message, turned away. No one interfered in a man's family business in Wyoming Territory. You'll stay in here until that rebellious spirit breaks, he growled, shoving her into the musty darkness of the barn. When I let you out, you'll agree to marry Nathaniel, or so help me God, I'll make you regret the day you were born. The heavy wooden door slammed shut, followed by the scraping sound of the crossbar falling into place. Penelope pounded against the rough planks until her hands ached, then slid down to the dirt floor, surrounded by the soft nickering of horses and the sweet smell of hay. He can't keep me in here forever, she whispered, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her uncertainty. Little did she know that 5 miles away, Dawson Adler was riding toward the Jane homestead, unaware that his life was about to change forever. Dawson urged his paint stallion forward, the rolling grassland stretching endlessly before him. At 26, he had spent the last 8 years driving cattle, breaking horses, and building a reputation as one of the finest ranch hands in the territory. His latest employer, the Double R Ranch, had sent him to deliver a message to Harold Jane about a business proposition. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky when Dawson approached the Jane property. He had met Harold before, a hard man known for his quick temper and quicker fists, but had only glimpsed his daughter from afar at town gatherings. The stories of her beauty were not exaggerated, but Dawson had heard whispers about her spirit too, something rare in these harsh lands where women often had the wildness beaten out of them by life or by men. As he approached the small farmhouse, he noticed Harold Jane sitting on the porch, a bottle of whiskey dangling from his fingers. The older man's eyes were bloodshot, his expression sour. Mr. Jane, Dawson called, dismounting and removing his hat respectfully. Mr. Randall sent me with a proposition about your south pasture. Harold grunted, taking another swig from his bottle. Tell Randall he can wait. Got family matters that need tending first. Dawson nodded, about to remount when he heard a faint cry from the direction of the barn. He paused, his brow furrowing. Something wrong with your livestock, sir? He asked casually. Harold's eyes narrowed. Nothing that concerns you, Cowboy. My daughter's learning a lesson in the barn. Women need to know their place. Dawson's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. Yes, sir. I'll tell Mr. Randall you'll be in touch. He mounted his horse and rode away slowly, but instead of heading back to the Double R, he circled around to the wooded area behind the Jane property. Tethering his horse, Dawson crept through the trees until he had a clear view of the barn. The cries had stopped, but now he could hear something else singing. A soft, defiant melody floated through the cracks in the barn wall. It was Barbara Allen, a sad ballad about love and death that his mother used to sing. Night fell and Dawson watched as Harold Jane stumbled from the porch into the house, the empty whiskey bottle discarded in the dirt. He waited another hour, making sure the man wouldn't emerge before approaching the barn. "Hello," he called softly through a crack in the wooden wall. "Miss Jane." "Are you in there?" The singing stopped abruptly. "Who's there?" came a cautious female voice. "Dawson Adler, madam. I work for the Double R. I came by earlier and, well, I heard what your father said." There was a moment of silence, then footsteps approached the door. "He's locked me in. Says he won't let me out until I agree to marry Nathaniel Spencer." Dawson's blood boiled. Spencer was a wealthy rancher in his 60s, known for his cruelty to both animals and the Chinese laborers he employed. "That ain't right, Miss Jane. No woman should be forced to marry." "Please," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "My father will sleep through the night with all he's drunk. If you could just lift the crossbar, stand back from the door, madam," Dawson said, decision made. "I'll have you out in a minute." He returned to his horse and retrieved the small axe he kept in his saddlebag for clearing trail. The barn door was solid oak, but the crossbar holder on the outside was the weak point. With careful, measured strokes to minimize noise, Dawson began to chip away at the wood around the metal bracket. Inside, Penelope pressed her ear against the door, her heart racing at each muffled thud. She had never met Dawson Adler, but she remembered seeing a tall, broad-shouldered cowboy with kind eyes at the last town social. He had tipped his hat to her, and she had felt something flutter in her chest, something she had quickly dismissed as foolishness. Now, as splinters of wood began to appear through cracks in the door, that flutter returned tenfold. After 20 minutes of careful work, the bracket gave way with a creak, and the crossbar fell to the ground. Dawson gently pushed the door open, and there she stood, Penelope Jane, her dress dusty from the barn floor, her honey-brown hair tumbling over her shoulders, and her eyes deep blue like a mountain lake filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "Miss Jane," he said, removing his hat. "I reckon you might need somewhere safe to go tonight." Penelope stepped forward into the moonlight, her gaze assessing the tall cowboy before her. His face was weathered from years under the sun, but his eyes were gentle, his hands strong yet careful as he set the axe down. "Why would you help me?" she asked, not moving from the doorway. "You don't know me." Dawson smiled slightly. "My ma raised me to believe that no one should be caged against their will, human or animal. Besides, I've heard about you in town. They say Penelope Jane has more backbone than most men in the territory." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "And what do you plan to do with me now that you've freed me, Mr. Adler? I have no money, no family besides my father. My sister runs a boarding house in Laramie. It's a hard ride, but we could make it by morning. She'd give you work and a place to stay until you decide what you want." Penelope glanced back at the farmhouse where her father slept. "He'll come after me. He needs the money from Spencer to pay his debts. Then we'd best be far away by the time he wakes," Dawson replied, extending his hand. "Do you trust me, Miss Jane?" She hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. "I have little choice, Mr. Adler, but yes, something tells me I can trust you." Within minutes, Penelope had gathered what few belongings she could carry in a small sack. Dawson helped her mount his paint stallion, then swung up behind her. The warmth of his chest against her back sent an unfamiliar but not unwelcome sensation through her as they rode away from the only home she had ever known. They traveled through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horse and drink from a clear stream. As dawn broke over the eastern horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Penelope felt something she hadn't experienced in years' hope. "We're about 3 hours from Laramie," Dawson said as they remounted. "My sister Eliza will welcome you. She left a bad marriage herself years back, so she understands." Penelope twisted slightly to look at him. "And what will you do, Mr. Adler?" "Won't helping me cost you your position at the Double R?" Dawson's expression grew serious. "Mr. Randall is a fair man. When I explain, he'll understand, and if he doesn't, He shrugged. There's always work for a good cowhand somewhere. You'd risk your livelihood for a stranger. His eyes met hers, steady and clear. Some things matter more than a job, Miss Jane. The rest of the journey passed in comfortable silence, interrupted only by Dawson pointing out landmarks or sharing stories about the territory. When they finally reached Laramie, the town was already bustling with morning activity, freight wagons rumbling down the main street, shopkeepers sweeping their boardwalks, and cowboys emerging from saloons after a night of carousing. Eliza Adler's boarding house sat at the edge of town, a tidy two-story building with white curtains in the windows and geraniums blooming on the porch. As they approached, a plump woman in her 30s emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. "Dawson, what brings you here in the middle of the week?" Her smile faded as she noticed Penelope. "And who might this be?" Dawson helped Penelope dismount before explaining the situation in low tones. Eliza's expression shifted from surprise to outrage to compassion as she listened. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and took Penelope's hands in hers. "You poor dear. Come inside and get cleaned up. I've got fresh bread just out of the oven and a vacant room that needs tending. If you're willing to work, you've got a place here as long as you need." Tears welled in Penelope's eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. It's Miss Eliza to everyone," she interrupted with a warm smile. "I threw my husband's name back at him along with his whiskey bottle when I left. Now come along inside." Dawson remained on the porch as the women entered the house. When Eliza returned moments later, her expression was serious. "That girl's been through hell, little brother. What exactly do you plan to do now?" Dawson sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "I need to return to the Double R and explain to Mr. Randall. Then I'll need to find Harold Jane and try to reason with him." Eliza snorted. "Reason with Harold Jane? You might as well try to reason with a rattlesnake. That man's mean to the bone, Dawson." "I have to try, Eliza. She deserves to live free without looking over her shoulder." His sister studied him for a long moment. "You've got feelings for her already, don't you?" Dawson didn't answer directly. "I'll be back in a few days. Keep her safe." As he mounted his horse, the door opened and Penelope stepped out, her face freshly washed, wearing a borrowed dress that was slightly too large for her slender frame. "You're leaving?" she asked, her voice small but steady. "Just for a few days. I need to speak with Mr. Randall and—" He hesitated. "And my father," she finished. "Mr. Adler, please be careful. He's dangerous when he drinks, and he drinks all the time now." Dawson nodded. "I'll be back before you know it, Miss Jane." "Penelope," she said softly. "After what you've done for me, I think you've earned the right to use my given name." A smile spread across his face. "Then you must call me Dawson." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, and Eliza cleared her throat pointedly from the doorway. With a tip of his hat, Dawson turned his horse and rode away, feeling Penelope's gaze following him down the dusty street. The ride back to the Double R gave Dawson plenty of time to think. He had acted on impulse, something he rarely did, and now he needed to face the consequences. Mr. Randall was fair but strict about his hands staying out of trouble. Interfering in another man's family matters was asking for trouble of the highest order. But every time Dawson remembered Penelope's voice through the barn door, the fear and defiance mingled in her tone. He knew he would make the same choice again. To his surprise, Mr. Randall took the news better than expected. "Harold Jane's been a thorn in my side for years," the rancher said, puffing on his pipe as they sat in his study. "Man's running that farm into the ground, still taking his daughter." He shook his head. "That's a dangerous game, son." "I couldn't leave her there, sir." Not knowing what he had planned for her, Randall studied him thoughtfully. "No, I suppose you couldn't. That's why I hired you. You've got a good head and a better heart." He tamped down his pipe tobacco. "Take Wilson and go talk to Jane. Offer him $500 for any claim on his daughter." Dawson blinked in surprise. "Sir, that's more than a year's wages. Consider it an advance. You can work it off." Randall's eyes twinkled. Unless, of course, you're planning to leave my employ for matrimony soon. Dawson felt heat rise in his face. Sir, I barely know Miss Jane. But you risked everything to help her, Randall chuckled. I wasn't born yesterday, Adler. Now go on, get this settled before Jane sobers up enough to cause real trouble. The next morning, Dawson and Wilson, a burly ranch hand with a scar across his chin, rode to the Jane farmstead. As they approached, Dawson's stomach tightened. The place looked different, somehow darker, more foreboding. Harold Jane sat on his porch, a rifle across his knees. His bloodshot eyes narrowed as the riders approached. You've got nerve showing your face here, Adler, he snarled. You stole my property. Dawson kept his voice level. Your daughter isn't property, Mr. Jane. I've come to offer you $500 to relinquish any claim on her future. Harold spat into the dirt. Nathaniel Spencer was offering $2,000 for her hand. You're short, Cowboy. Spencer's offer died when you locked your daughter in a barn, Wilson interjected, his hand casually resting near his holster. $500 is generous, considering the sheriff might be interested in hearing about your methods of persuasion. Jane's face twisted with rage. You threatening me, Scarface? Just stating facts, Wilson replied calmly. For a tense moment, Dawson thought Jane might raise his rifle, but then the man's shoulders sagged slightly. I want $700, and her mother's locket. The girl took it when she left. $500, Dawson countered, and she keeps the locket that rightfully belonged to her mother. Jane glared, but the fight seemed to drain from him. Fine. But tell her she's dead to me now. No daughter of mine defies me and lives to tell about it. As they counted out the money, Dawson felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. The broken man before him had once been a father who surely must have loved his daughter. What twisted path had led him to become this bitter shell? With the transaction complete, Dawson and Wilson rode away, the signed paper relinquishing Harold's paternal rights tucked safely in Dawson's saddlebag. That was easier than expected, Wilson commented as they put distance between themselves and the farm. Dawson shook his head. Too easy. Keep your eyes open on the ride back. His instincts proved correct. As they passed through a narrow ravine, a shot rang out, the bullet whizzing past Dawson's ear. Both men immediately dove from their horses, seeking cover behind boulders as Harold Jane's voice echoed through the ravine. You think I'd let you humiliate me for $500, he shouted, firing again. I want my daughter back. Spencer still wants her. Jane, put the rifle down, Dawson called back. This won't end well for you. Another shot was the only response, this one splintering the rock near Wilson's head. I've had enough of this, Wilson muttered, carefully aiming his revolver toward the ridge where the shots originated. He fired twice in rapid succession, and a cry of pain followed. They waited, tense and ready, but no more shots came. Cautiously, they approached the ridge to find Harold Jane clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his fingers, his rifle on the ground beside him. You should have taken the money and moved on, Dawson said, kicking the rifle away. Now you've got a bullet wound and the law to deal with. They bandaged Jane's wound, tied him to his horse, and escorted him to the sheriff in the nearest town. The lawman, familiar with Harold's reputation, locked him up without question when he heard the full story. He'll face charges for attempted murder, the sheriff explained. With your testimony, he'll likely get several years in the territorial prison. Dawson felt no satisfaction as he watched the cell door close on Harold Jane. Only relief that Penelope would be truly free now, and sadness for what might have been between father and daughter in another life. After sending Wilson back to the Double R with a full report for Mr. Randall, Dawson rode hard toward Laramie, arriving as dusk was settling over the town. Lights glowed warmly in the windows of Eliza's boarding house, and as he approached, the door opened to reveal Penelope standing there, as if she had sensed his return. She stepped onto the porch, her face illuminated by the lantern hanging overhead. In clean clothes that fit her properly, with her hair neatly braided and falling over one shoulder, she looked younger, less burdened than when he had first seen her. You came back, she said simply. Dawson dismounted, suddenly aware of the trail dust covering him and the exhaustion pulling at his limbs. I said I would. Eliza wasn't sure. She said men make promises they don't always keep. He climbed the steps until he stood before her. Your father won't trouble you anymore. He's in jail and he's signed away his rights to determine your future. Penelope's eyes widened. How did you manage that? With Mr. Randall's help and $500. You paid him, for me. Her voice held a note of distress. Dawson hastened to explain. Not for you, for your freedom. There's a difference, and it's an advance from Mr. Randall that I'll work off. She studied him for a long moment. Why would you do that for someone you barely know? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken possibilities. Dawson removed his hat, turning it in his hands as he searched for the right words. When I heard your voice through that barn door singing, despite everything, I knew you were someone special, someone worth helping. He paused. Someone worth knowing better if you'll allow it. A soft smile curved Penelope's lips. Eliza has offered me a permanent position here. I'll be managing the housekeeping and helping with the accounts. That's wonderful, Dawson said, genuinely pleased for her. Yes, but... She stepped closer. The Double R is a 3-day ride from here. He met her gaze steadily. I've been thinking about that. Mr. Randall mentioned the ranch needs someone to manage the new breeding program he's starting. It would mean a small house of my own on the property, regular hours instead of constant trail rides. He took a deep breath. It would mean I could visit Laramie more often. The hope that blossomed in her eyes gave him courage. How often? She asked softly. As often as you'd welcome me. Penelope reached out hesitantly, her fingers just brushing his calloused hand. I think I'd welcome you very often, Dawson Adler. The touch of her hand sent warmth spreading through him. Then I'll accept Mr. Randall's offer first thing tomorrow. The door behind them opened and Eliza appeared, hands on her hips but a twinkle in her eye. Are you two planning to stand out here all night? Supper's getting cold and Dawson looks like he hasn't eaten in days. Penelope blushed and stepped back, but not before Dawson gave her hand a gentle squeeze. As they followed Eliza inside, a sense of possibility of beginning filled the air between them. Over the next 6 months, Dawson made the journey to Laramie every other weekend. Each visit brought new discoveries. Penelope's laugh when truly amused, her passion for reading, her surprising skill with numbers that made her invaluable to Eliza's business. In turn, she learned about Dawson's childhood in Missouri, his dreams of someday having a small horse ranch of his own, and his quiet but unwavering sense of justice. Letters filled the days between visits, sometimes arriving rain-soaked or sun-faded, but always eagerly read and carefully preserved. What had begun as gratitude on Penelope's part and admiration on Dawson's gradually deepened into something neither had experienced before. It was during an unusually warm day in early spring when Dawson arrived unannounced at the boarding house, his face alight with excitement. I've found it, he said by way of greeting when Penelope opened the door. The perfect spot for my ranch. She ushered him inside, curiosity brightening her eyes. Where? When can I see it? It's about halfway between here and the Double R, a small place with a solid cabin and good grazing land. The owner's moving to California for his health. Dawson took her hands in his. I've put down a deposit with my savings, and Mr. Randall's agreed to sell me 20 of his horses on credit to start my breeding program. Dawson, that's wonderful, Penelope exclaimed, genuinely happy for him. You're going to be an excellent rancher, he squeezed her hands gently. There's just one problem, her smile faltered. What's that? The cabin has 2 bedrooms, a fine kitchen, and a porch that catches the sunset just right. His eyes held her steadily. It's far too much house for just one person. Penelope's breath caught as understanding dawned. Are you saying, I'm saying I love you, Penelope Jane. I have since I heard you singing through that barn door. I'm saying I want to build a life with you if you'll have me. He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a simple gold band. I'm asking if you'll be my wife. Tears filled Penelope's eyes as she looked at the man before her, the man who had literally broken down barriers to free her, who had given her the chance to discover her own strength and worth. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly. "Yes, Dawson Adler, I will marry you." The wedding took place 2 weeks later in Laramie's small church, with Eliza, Mr. Randall, and a handful of friends in attendance. As they exchanged vows, Penelope wore her mother's locket around her neck and carried wildflowers Dawson had gathered that morning. That evening, as they sat on the porch of their new cabin watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Dawson wrapped his arm around his wife's shoulders. "I never thought I'd find someone like you," he said softly. "Someone brave enough to defy expectations, strong enough to start over, and kind enough to love a simple cowboy." Penelope leaned against him, her head fitting perfectly in the crook of his shoulder. "And I never thought freedom would lead me to love." She traced the rough skin of his hand, the hand that had wielded an axe to set her free. "But here we are, he agreed, kissing the top of her head. As darkness settled over their small piece of Wyoming, they remained on the porch, talking softly about the horses they would raise, the garden Penelope would plant, and the children they hoped would someday fill the second bedroom. The barn door that had once imprisoned her had led, through its destruction, to a life neither of them could have imagined, one built on choice, respect, and a love that had begun with an act of defiance and the courage to break free. 5 years later, Penelope stood in that same doorway, watching as Dawson taught their 3-year-old son to sit on his first pony. Their daughter, just a year old, gurgled happily in her arms. The horse breeding business was thriving, and Penelope's small side business of keeping books for local merchants had gained her respect throughout the county. Occasionally, news would reach them of Harold Jane. He had served 3 years in prison before being released, and last they heard, he had headed to California, a broken man still clinging to bitterness. Penelope had written to him once, offering forgiveness but not reconciliation. The letter had gone unanswered, and she had made her peace with that. "Mama, look!" her son called as the pony took a few gentle steps with Dawson's hand firmly on the bridle. "I'm riding." "I see you, my brave boy," she called back, smiling as Dawson glanced up at her with the same warm look that still made her heart skip. In that moment, with the Wyoming wind tousling her hair and the future stretching wide open before them, Penelope silently thanked the barn door that had imprisoned her and the axe that had set her free, for without them, she might never have found her true home in Dawson Adler's steadfast heart.